Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, January 30th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about that Michigan versus the NCAA. Michigan pushing back against the NCAA just a little bit, and I think it's a sign of what the NCAA is to a lot of teams out there right about now. Then we'll get to which head coach is going to win their first national title. A lot of guys definitely are in line to possibly get that next one, maybe even in 2025. But definitely want to join Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, and Dabo Swinney as the only active head coaches with a national title. Then we'll get to my favorite NFL prospects, kind of part two of this. I have a ton of different guys in. We'll talk about that guy we talked about yesterday, Alfred Collins from Texas. Very talented, very athletic. Then we'll get to my way too early 2025 superlatives. I'll go with best quarterback, best offensive, defensive player, sleeper, team of the year, all of that different stuff as I head into the 2025 season. Obviously can change once we're in there. And then we'll get to my top 10 head coaches as we head into 2025. Very tough list to put together. A ton of guys that are hanging right around that 9 to 13 area, but feel pretty good about the list that I've put together. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that and we can have fun back and forth and ask any questions you have about possibly this Michigan saga, because it continues on. Michigan has decided to fight against the NCAA just a little bit. They released a 137-page document basically detailing why some of their level 1 violations should be dropped to a level 2 violation instead of a level 1, try to diminish some of the penalties that they could incur during this time. And it's a little bit of a complicated story, and definitely one that we'll have more details on as we go throughout this kind of saga that we're on right now. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of different things to think about here, and overall, let's just break down what the story is, what has been released and what was released yesterday that we didn't necessarily know, or at least didn't know in very certain terms. The biggest one is multiple staff members were warned about the wrongdoing. Multiple staff members had knowledge, at least, that there was something that went beyond the rules. One of the most best examples is Mike Hart, the former running back coach there, was informed that Michigan was, quote-unquote, going further in the sign-stealing process than others by a Rutgers staff member. So that was something that, people in that program had knowledge that, at the very least, other people felt that they were going further than other teams were. So that is obviously something that we knew to a certain extent. We had a knowledge that certain people within that program knew. We didn't know how far up it went. Seems like a lot of the position coaches, at the very least, knew what was going on, including Mike Hart. And then you had another person in the Michigan program, a much lower level person, raise the concern to a number of people because Connor Stalions asked him to go rent a car to go scout Georgia, which was a team they were going to play in the CFP. But technically, that is not against the rules of the NCAA because they weren't on their regular season schedule. So that's kind of the gray area that Michigan's working in here. They're saying, we did X, Y, and Z, but all of those things aren't necessarily against the NCAA investigation because we didn't play them in the regular season, or because it wasn't by a specific staff member, it was by a family member of a staff member. Some stuff like that has really popped up, and apparently the kid that inside the Michigan program that brought it up to Chris Partridge, was one of the one of the position coaches there for a time before he left last year. He told Stalions, told Stalions that you can't use him in your signal organization stupid thing, whatever that means. And it does show that, at the very least, there were people within that program that had very real working knowledge of what was going on. They fully understood that some of the stuff that he was doing went beyond what was allowed by the NCAA. What they're arguing is some semantic arguments, if I'm being totally honest. Some semantics that, it wasn't on a regular season schedule, or it wasn't a staff member doing it. It was a family member of a staff member. So it's a complicated issue, but the reality is we know for a fact now that a number of staff members knew, and a number of them go up to another guy, and we'll talk about that here in a second. The other part is the tip came from within the Michigan program. That is something that everyone liked to tell you that it was Ryan Day's family, that it was Ryan Day's brother. It was not. It was obviously a staffer on the Michigan staff, and I don't know who it was. Possibly was that younger kid that brought it up to Chris Partridge, but at the end of the day, it was within the Michigan program. It was not outside of it. It was not Ryan Day doing some sting operation against Michigan. It was someone within that program that had seen the wrongdoing happen and say, got to stand up, got to do something, and that's kind of how it unfolded. So that can kind of be put to bed. Overall, doesn't necessarily do too much for us in terms of trying to figure out, relitigate this thing and figure out, how much wrongdoing there was. It does show that a lot of this, I don't want to say bending of the truth, but a lot of the narrative pushing that was out there right afterwards was in a lot of ways to save Michigan's face. And I totally understand that. That's the reality of just about anyone that's under investigation by the NCAA, but it has been confirmed that it came from within the Michigan program and probably was just a lower level staffer that had knowledge of all this stuff going on and said, at a certain point, you got to stand up and do something. So that is another big piece of this, something that doesn't necessarily change the story too much, if I'm being totally honest, but does kind of change the way that some Michigan fans and some people around that were kind of pointing it towards the Ohio State side. That is not what happened here. It came from the Michigan side, and then you just had to figure out what was going to happen after that. The biggest piece of this, and the one that has stolen a ton of headlines, has been Sherrone Moore's text, and the excuse that he has for deleting a lot of the text for Connor Stalions. To catch everyone up, there was a lot of, I believe it was 57 deleted texts between Sherrone Moore and Connor Stalions. It was a lot of assorted number of things. There were a couple of different things that were fairly incriminating, and we'll talk about that in a second, but a lot of the different things to talk about was the coach, Sherrone Moore, told school officials that he deleted the messages in frustration and anger. Shortly after the bombshell news broke, he's saying that he suggested he did not want one person, Connor Stalions, to receive credit for all the work that they did to get to the national championship. He said he was just so angry at someone that would do that type of thing to the program and to the kids. Here's the thing. I totally understand that there are certain things that would have happened behind closed doors that I don't fully understand, that there are certain things that I don't know the full story of. The reality is, if you're in a position where you have incriminating text for someone else, which he did, he had a certain text about the CMU-SMU game that was very famous because Connor Stalions was photographed on the sideline. He had scheduled a meeting with someone named Jack Costner from CMU before that game unfolded. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what was discussed in that meeting, but I know for a fact the CMU staffer doesn't need to be meeting with Sherrone Moore before they play Michigan State. I can say that very, very confidently. So the text between Sherrone Moore and Stalions definitely raised some questions, and I think there's a lot of different ones that really do incriminate him in a lot of different ways. What I will say is I do think there's certain things that you don't really know all the details around these different things, and the other part of this is, if he was angry, if he was super angry about what Connor Stalions was doing and he really wanted to make sure that that guy did not get the credit for what Michigan was doing, why not bring it to someone? I understand that there would have been certain penalties that Michigan would have had to incur because of this, regardless of who brought it to someone, regardless of what happened. But if he felt that the nature of their program and the nature of the game that they play was being compromised by someone that was not all that important to the program, that was not this big name, that didn't deserve to have his name in that type of realm, why not say something to someone? Why not get him fired immediately? Why not kick him out the door and continue moving on about your business? Because the reality is you could have helped out this process a lot while saving yourself in a number of different ways. So it's not to say that Sherrone Moore made absolutely the wrong decision. It's just to say, if you were really that mad, if you were really that upset about what Connor Stalions was doing, why not be the guy that helped kind of take him down, help kick him out of the sport, help be the guy that kind of removed him from Michigan football instead of what he is right now, which is essentially kind of a cult hero around there. So I don't fully buy that, if I'm being totally honest. I don't necessarily think Sherrone Moore is outright lying, but I think there are certain things about that just don't make sense to me. I think the reality is, if I was that upset about someone really defacing the Michigan program and putting their season in a really bad spot and possibly making their season go up in flames, I'd be really mad, and I'd be trying to get that guy out of the sport as quickly as possible, and Sherrone Moore went pretty quiet pretty quickly. So the texts are a very interesting thing. It's obviously something that will continue to be talked about, and we'll probably get a little bit more details about what all was in there, but there were definitely some things in there that incriminate Sherrone Moore, and he deleted them pretty quickly. That's what I know for a fact. Whether or not it was because he was angry or because he was trying to save himself a little bit, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's a very confusing situation and one that absolutely calls into a lot of questions. But what's really happening here? There's a lot of different ways to look at this and a lot of different things to a lot of different lenses to go at this from. The reality of this situation is, from what I've read of the 137 pages that Michigan released, it did not help them. It did not make them look better. It did not make me feel better about what they did this past season. Now, I've said time and again that I do think it played a part in what they were able to do in the path to a national title. I don't think it won them the national title. I think that's very, very clear at this point. If you believe it won them the national title, then that's a totally different conversation that can be had another day. But the reality is, in those 137 pages, I don't think anyone came out of it saying, oh, okay, Michigan's totally off scot-free, it makes total sense what they're doing, and all of those should be dropped to a level 2 violation. What I think is happening, and it is not necessarily exactly what is happening, but what I think is happening and what it seems to be happening, at least from an outside point of view, the NCAA is weak. The NCAA doesn't mean anything to a Michigan, to a Texas, to an Alabama, to a Georgia. They do not necessarily hold any power over these programs anymore. So they can try as best as they might. If they, punish them for certain things, Michigan will come right back at them and they'll throw some lawsuit at them. If they want to, go after them for something totally different, Michigan will make sure they have something ready for that. The reality of the situation is, regardless of what Michigan did, regardless of if the 137 pages made them look better or worse, in my opinion, it made them look a little bit worse than it did before. I don't think it matters. I think they understand they're dealing with an entity that has no power over them, that has no power to say, these are the rules and we're going to enforce these rules. You don't have rules. You don't have a structure to work from right now. So if you're Michigan, you see a wounded lion. You see a wounded gazelle, and you're the lion, actually. But you see a wounded gazelle and you're saying, I'm going to tear it to pieces. That's the reality of this situation. If no one in the sport, if no school in the sport actually cares about what the NCAA does or is actually scared of the NCAA, they're going to keep pushing them until they crumble. And we've seen time and again in these cases that the NCAA will crumble. So overall, my take about this is this story did not make me feel better about the Michigan scheme. It didn't make me feel like they did a ton of things that were different. It didn't make me feel like Connor Stalions wasn't a terrible part of what they did last year. It didn't make me feel any differently. It actually made me feel a little bit worse about some of the things that they did. I don't think they care. I think they know for a fact that the NCAA, if they push hard enough, is going to fold at some point because they folded time and again. So I think the reality of the situation is the NCAA just has to go. That's the reality of all of these situations where you see schools and teams and players just kind of take the NCAA to the woodshed over and over and over again. And Michigan said, they were sitting there thinking about what their next steps were, and they were saying, why don't we just fight this thing? Why don't we just fight the entity that continues to get beat in a court of law, continues to get beat when they try to enforce their rules, and just dare them to enforce them? Because they're probably not going to be able to. So overall, I don't think I walked out of that thing thinking, okay, Michigan's totally exonerated in my mind. I definitely didn't think that. There are a lot of different things in there that I didn't necessarily know, at least on no uncertain terms, that make me feel a little bit worse about what Michigan did last year. I just don't think it matters. I think they understand that they're working with an entity that has no power, that has no teeth, and they can kind of push around as they please. So I think they're going to probably find a way to get a couple of those violations dropped a little bit. Now, there is the other side of it where it could go wrong for them, but the reality is, how many times in the last 5 years have things really gone wrong for people when they're battling the NCAA? It just doesn't happen anymore because the NCAA doesn't have any power anymore. So that's the big thing here, is we got to find someone else to run this sport. We got to find someone else that these teams will be afraid of. These teams will actually believe will actually do something to them, because Michigan definitely doesn't believe that the NCAA is going to do anything concrete to them. So that's something we can talk about in time, definitely something that will come out in more detail. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, let's talk about the next head coach to win a national title. Let's take a little bit of a break from the NCAA talk. Let's get into the next coach to possibly join Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, and Dabo Swinney as the only active head coaches with a national title, and we'll talk about why it might take a little bit longer for some of these guys right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Michigan fighting back against the NCAA. I think there's a lot of different things to take from it. The biggest thing is the NCAA just isn't the power that we need it to be as of right now, and I think Michigan knows that, and I think they're trying to get off a little bit easier than they probably would if we had a governing body that had some teeth to it. But at the end of the day, definitely something that we'll unpack a little bit more in detail, and definitely something that we'll get more details on as the week and a couple of weeks unfold here. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about the next head coach to win their first national title, because one just did. Ryan Day just got on top of the mountaintop for the very first time in his career in his 6th year on the job in 2024, and there's definitely some things to talk about with the national title head coaches and what's the possible next head coach to possibly do it. And we'll start with kind of a pattern that has been forming around these head coaches that have won it and the recent national champions. So Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney. Those are the active head coaches that have a national title. Obviously, Dabo Swinney with the 2 in 2016-2018, Kirby Smart in 2021-22, and then Ryan Day this past year. And then you obviously have Jim Harbaugh in 2023 in between that, but has left the sport, obviously. But prior to those 4 head coaches, prior to the really the Kirby Smart year, and really the Dabo Swinney year, but including Dabo Swinney in this conversation, let's just say, by 2021 and back all the way to, from 2000 to 2021, there were 2 head coaches that had won a national title that were beyond their first 4 years at the job, and it was Mac Brown in 2005, in 2005, and then it was Dabo Swinney in 2016, and in his 8th year. So you're in a position now where the last 3 years, or the last 4 years now, you have Kirby Smart, one of them in 2021 in his 6th year on the job. In 2022, one of them in his 7th year. Jim Harbaugh, one of them in his 9th year on the job in 2023. And then Ryan Day, just one of them in his 6th year. A lot of guys used to win it very, very early on. So it's something to think about as we dig into more of these head coaches, including Ryan Day is a great example where in his 4th year, in his 3rd year, he got to the national title, lost, and everyone was talking about how he can't win the big one. In his 5th year, he lost to, or 4th year, he lost to UGA and Kirby Smart, and he was thinking, man, will I ever get through this thing? And then finally, in year 6, it fully breaks through. So it's a huge change from what we used to have where all but one coach up until 2016, from 2000 to 2016, had won their championship in the first 4 years of their tenure. Now it's everyone right after that. It's everyone 6 years and beyond that are winning their national titles, and I don't know if that's just a blip on the radar or something to watch as we move forward, but it's definitely something to think about as we get into these head coaches that can't win the big one or that haven't gotten to the mountaintop. Maybe just need a little bit more time in the NIL and transfer portal era to really do what they need to do and get to the top of the mountaintop the way they want to. But let's get into some candidates, some guys that could possibly do it, and maybe some monikers to follow with how long they've been on the job and how long they have to go to get to that 6th year or that 7th year where these guys finally broke through. And we'll talk about the guy that was just about 12 points away from winning his first one this past year, and a remarkably talented head coach, a very young head coach that has a ton of career still ahead of him. I think there's still questions when you talk about the Marshall NIU type games, where if you have a couple of those games every single year, you're probably not going to make the CFP enough times to really give yourself a great shot to compete with some of the other head coaches we can talk about here in a second. So I think there is worries with Marcus Freeman, but the reality is we saw him kind of grow up before our eyes this year. Did an incredible job getting that team ready to go right after that NIU game. Would have been very easy for that team to fold and lose to a Louisville, lose to a USC, and that season to go to an end. But they found a way to a national title, did an incredible job, and I'd bet that they win a national title while he's there. Now, how long that's going to take, That's a big time question. He's only in his third year on the job, so maybe it's another 3 years before he finds his way to the mountaintop like some other coaches have. But the reality is, he's done an incredible job in his first couple of years there. I really think he's going to win a national title at Notre Dame. Now, I would have said that about a number of coaches in the past 10 years that haven't found their way there. So there's a lot of different things to compare here, but the way that I see it, Marcus Freeman might be one of the very top on the list of who can possibly make it to that next level, who can possibly win that first national title next. Steve Sarkisian is the other name that I want to talk about, the other guy that Ohio State took out on their way to the national title in. Sark is the guy that it definitely is going to get the next can't win the big one tag. I have a feeling that he will be the next guy that we're talking about around the James Franklins of the world and the Ryan Days of the world, that you can't win the big one, you can't get over the hump, but very much a very capable coach, and he's done a great job building one of the best rosters, one of the best staffs in the country, and they were a play away from the national title 2 years in a row. You just got to get that one play. You just got to finally get over that hump, and it's much easier said than done. But coming out of his fourth year at Texas, so getting into that area where people are starting to win national titles nowadays, and he's definitely a guy that could absolutely win a national title as early as next year, with Arch Manning coming in with a lot of hype around that program, maybe the number one team in the country going into 2025, and a lot of juice, no doubt about that. So going to be awesome to see what he can do, and definitely a guy that I don't want to say for sure that he's going to win a national title, but feel very good about where Texas is heading, and it's hard for me to believe that a team that's been this close 2 years in a row is just going to miss the entirety of his time there. Dan Lanning's a name that is going to be very popular around this discussion for a very long time because what he's done at Oregon has been really, really incredible. Now, the question will be getting over that last hump, and it's going to be the question for all of these head coaches that we talk about is getting over that final game, because he was able to beat Ohio State. He was able to beat Penn State this year, and then when you get that one huge game in the Rose Bowl, you just get railroaded. And frankly, I think a lot of people were going to get railroaded by Ohio State on that day, so I'm not taking a ton away from him, and I think it's very fair to say that all of the years that he's been at Oregon, they've taken slow steps forward. You know, they gotten a little bit better last year, missed out on the Pac-12 championship, missed out on a couple of different things because of Washington. This year, we're able to break through, win the Big Ten their very first year, beat Ohio State, be the only undefeated team rolling in, and then you just run into a buzzsaw. So he's done a remarkable job. Would not be surprised at all if this was the guy we were talking about next year and saying who's going to follow up Dan Lanning and win their first national title, because he's done an incredible job there. They've only gotten better since he's been there, and I can't imagine it's going to stop anytime soon, because the foundation that he's built there has been about as good as you'll find around the country. James Franklin is the other guy you're going to want to talk about, and it's the guy you're probably watching the closest as you head into 2025, because there's a lot of different guys that very badly need this, and he could be the third straight head coach to win their very first national title. All the pressure in the world is on him. There's no doubt about that. Does he have enough to get multiple wins over, let's say, Texas, Ohio State, Georgia to win a national title? That's what he's going to have to do, one way or another. He's going to have to get over that hump of winning that huge game and then get over it again and then do it one more time to win a national title. So he's staring at 2025, probably the head coach that has maybe his best chance in 2025. Now, I don't think it's going to fall off a cliff after 2025, but there definitely is a little bit of a worry there. There's definitely a little bit of a worry that 2025 is the perfect stars-aligned moment, and if they don't hit, how long will it take to get back there? So that's something to watch. Definitely a very capable head coach and a guy that I fully expect to get at least close at some point soon, maybe even in 2025. And then you got some other candidates. You got Kalen DeBoer, a very good head coach that was very close to winning one of these national titles not too long ago. So definitely a guy that can absolutely get there. I think the question is, adapting to the SEC and how long he'll have to do that. We talked about how it takes some guys to break through at their new job to finally get to that national title level. He won't have 6 years. I can absolutely promise you that. If they go 9-3 next year, he might get 2026, but that's about all you're getting. If that's what you're going to give them every single year down there in Tuscaloosa, they're going to kick you out the door pretty quickly. Then you do have Brian Kelly, a very established head coach that is looking towards 2025, kind of the same way James Franklin is. A lot of very veteran talent coming back, a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball that obviously has the defensive coordinator that's going into his second year. feels like a team that could possibly make that jump. And Brian Kelly's been close in the past. Maybe he can finally break through in 2025 or beyond. And then Mario Cristobal, a guy that it just feels like that team is so close to kicking down the door. Now, this year, I would argue was a little bit disappointing in some different ways. It felt a lot like that 2023 LSU season, but the reality is he's still building. He's still getting that program in a better place than it was yesterday, and I have to assume that's going to continue, and I have to assume at some point they can possibly break through. I think they're a little bit further away than some of these other teams, but not quite too far away. And then Michigan, Sharon Moore in Michigan, can they possibly get back to the mountaintop? I think they're much further away than all of these other guys that we've talked about. I think that's fair to say. I'm definitely a little bit nervous about the future with what we just talked about in the first segment, so there's a lot of questions here. There's no doubt about that, but a very capable head coach and a guy that absolutely can win a national title if he's given enough time and enough ability to win a national title, and that'll be a fascinating thing to watch that will have as much to do with the NCAA as just about anyone else. But my pick for who's going to do this, my pick for the next guy that's going to break through and win their first national title is Steve Sarkisian. I do think this guy has the best mix of elite talent, is in a great spot with the SEC where multiple losses will still give you a chance at the CFP and at a title where they could be an Ohio State type figure in a couple of years where maybe they lose a couple of games they're not supposed to lose, but they find their way in as an 8 seed and become a juggernaut at the end of the season. I think they're one of the teams that can possibly do that, so whenever they're in the field, they are very, very dangerous. So Sark's going into his 5th year in 2025. If the new pattern has held up, it might take him one more year. A lot of guys have had to wait till their 6th year, but you do get beyond that 4th year. Maybe you have a chance to lift that trophy, and it could very well be in 2025 that he finally does break through, gets that national championship trophy for the first time in his career, but still a little bit of work to do, no doubt about that. But when I look around this program, and when I look around the country overall, I think I'm looking at what Ohio State did a year ago and what Georgia and Alabama did for so long. We're seeing a lot of those things in Austin, Texas right now, and I'll bet on Steve Sarkisian to be the next head coach to win his first national title. Could very well be any of the guys that we just talked about, and it could very well be in 2025, because I don't know how confident I feel about Ohio State replacing all those guys, about Georgia finding their way right back to the mountaintop, and Kirby, and then Clemson and Dabo Swinney is a whole lot of questions. There's no doubt about that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and we could be having the same conversation next year where we say who's going to follow up Steve Sarkisian, or who's going to follow up Marcus Freeman, or who's going to follow up James Franklin as the next head coach to win their first national title. It would be an awesome thing to watch, but I'll go with Steve Sarkisian as the next guy. And I think it could be a number of guys. But at the end of the day, let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's do my favorite NFL prospects. We'll do a little bit of a part 2 here. A couple of guys that I really, really like. And we'll talk about that guy we talked about yesterday, and Alfred Collins from Texas, right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the next head coach to possibly win their first national title. I'll take my pick. I'll go with Steve Sarkisian for the time being. I do think that's going to be the next guy to win one. There's a lot of really good names, including Dan Lanning, including Marcus Freeman, and maybe James Franklin in 2025 can make that little bit of a run. But let's get into my favorite draft prospects. We'll get into part 2 here. A couple of different guys that I didn't have a chance to get to yesterday. Definitely want to unpack for you today. And let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And we'll start with a guy that might be a little bit overshadowed somehow with the team that he was on, and that is Lathan Ransom, the Ohio State safety. This is a guy that did not get nearly enough love this past year because of the guy he was playing next to. Caleb Downs takes a lot of the energy out of the room when you're talking about safeties at Ohio State, but this guy is very smart. He's very tough. He's incredibly good at coming downhill and playing the run game very well. He's a guy that does need a little bit of work in coverage at different times. We'll see a couple of breakdowns in coverage, and a couple of guys around him have been really helpful to kind of help him in that journey, but I do think there's a world where he gets put into the right situation where he's playing, say, a boundary safety, and he's in a position where he has a really good free safety on the other side. He has some very talented corners. I think he's going to be more than fine and be a very, very useful player where I don't know. The only only team coming to my head right now is the Falcons because I'm a Falcons fan. But at the end of the day, it could be very useful for a number of different teams out there. He had a sack, 3 forced fumbles, and an INT last year. He's a guy that can make every play you possibly want him to. Now, the coverage might be something you have to work on just a little bit more, but when you have a guy that plays the run that well and plays that aggressive and that passionate, I'd take the chance on him and let him figure out some of the kinks. So really like what Lathan Ransom has been able to do. I think coming back to Ohio State for another year was huge for him, and now he moves on to the next level and cannot wait to see what he can do. Brashard Smith is someone I want to talk about. I absolutely love this kid. He moved from wide receiver to running back this past year, went for 1,300 yards and 14 scores on the ground for SMU this year, and was a huge reason why they were able to get as far as they were. This is a dude that can make every single play, and frankly, there is a spot for this type of guy on every single roster across the league. If you are a true receiving back that can find tons of openings and you can utilize them in tons of different ways, you are going to have a job. That's just the reality of football right now, where if you have a gadget guy that you can play around with, a Isaiah McKenzie, an Xavier Worthy type player for the Chiefs possibly, he is someone that could do that type of thing. Now, I don't know if he necessarily has the outright speed of all those guys. He probably is very close, if I'm being totally honest, but he can absolutely be a guy that you use as a gadget player, you use as a returner on kickoffs, and then, say, slowly develop into a back that you can really use long term. He's a little bit undersized, there's no doubt about that, but a lot of people were saying James Cook was undersized when he walked out of here, and this guy still has tons of ability to be found in the running back position. The size isn't ideal, but I think the speed makes up for it, and I think whoever drafts him is going to get plenty of use out of Brashard Smith. Shamar Stewart is someone we talked about a little bit yesterday, and a guy that I just really, really like. I don't think there's a world where he is not someone that has a long NFL career, not necessarily because he's this absolute beast of an athlete, or he's someone that is totally going to tear apart people right from day one. He can play anywhere. He can play anywhere across the defensive line that you need him to play. So he can play a 3-tech and be a real defensive tackle. If you want to put him at nose guard, that might be a little aggressive, but you're welcome to put him at the 1-tech and just see what happens. And then you can put him outside. You can put him outside and let him be a true pass rusher. And we were talking about it yesterday with my guy Anthony, that you have a team like the Dolphins that have a Chop Robinson on one side. You need a stabilizer on the other side. You need a guy that can really play the run, that can push guys back into the line of scrimmage, that can push them back to all the tacklers in the middle of the field. That's going to be this guy. He's incredibly, incredibly smart, has really long arms, absolutely can set the edge, and he's going to be a really, really special player. I don't think his ceiling is even close to where he is right now. I think he can be a much better pass rusher, but more than anything, while he's figuring out the pass rushing part, he can be an elite player in the run game, and that's exactly what everyone needs from their edge rusher. If you can set the edge in the run game, you are going to be a long-time edge rusher in the NFL, and I think Shamar Stewart can do that just about as well as anyone in the entire draft. Alec Ayomenor, a very talented wide receiver from Stanford. This is a guy that I love for two very, very big reasons. His 50-50 ball ability is absolutely insane, and his run blocking is about as good as you're going to find across this entire wide receiver class. And if you can do those two things, congratulations, you're going to be in the NFL for about a decade. You can do a number of things with guys that are 6'2", 210, like this guy is, went for over 800 yards in the past 2 seasons, over 1,000 the year before this one, and he's a guy that you can put him in as a starter right away. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be your number one wide receiver and totally tear people to pieces. What I am saying is he can be your wide receiver 3 and set the edge in a run game, can do incredible things as a lead blocker, and is a guy that if you need that one play in the red zone, the hands are elite, the body control is great, and he's absolutely someone that can make those 50-50 contested plays that a lot of guys you're going to need are going to be able to make. So very, very impressive player. I don't see him being a downright star at the next level, but I think it's going to be really hard to keep him off a roster, and he's going to be a guy that these whatever fans he gets drafted to are going to going to end up loving, because he is not afraid to get down and dirty, to do the dirty work for whatever team he's on, and he is very, very good at doing that dirty work. Alfred Collins is the other guy that we talked about yesterday at the defensive tackle position, and he's a guy that can absolutely fly up the boards over the next couple of months, because when you look at this guy on paper, the measurables are absolutely ridiculous. He can do a number of different things. You can play him at a number of different places. I mean, early in his career, he was an outright edge rusher when he came into Texas, and they slowly moved him inside because he got a little bit bigger. That was kind of where he fit, but again, like Shamar Stewart, play around with him. Put him in a number of different techniques, put him in a number of different places, and see how he can affect the play, because he's a very, very athletic kid, a guy that can make so many different plays on the football field. And you look down what he could do throughout this draft process, I think his measurables are going to be about as good as anyone in that entire group when you get to the combine. And I think he's one of those guys that you might be able to pick him up in the late second round, early third round. You're probably going to really love to get him there, if I'm being totally honest. He is a very, very special player, and a guy that I still think hasn't quite hit his ceiling, because he was playing edge rusher for so long. He was that edge rushing, really athletic kind of pass rushing guy, and now you move him to the NFL. He has a little bit more time to get comfortable at defensive tackle. I think he could be downright special. I think he'd be one of the best pass rushing defensive tackles in the entire NFL, and I think he's a guy that is going to be really hard to keep off the field, because his stamina is absolutely incredible, the athleticism is great, and you can play him in just about any technique that you possibly want. So he's a guy that I think you might be able to buy low right now. I think you're going to be selling really, really high in a couple of years, because I think the growth of this guy is still yet to come, and I think there's a lot of incredible things that he's going to be able to do over the next couple of years. Tez Johnson is another guy that I absolutely love, and there's a number of reasons, and a number of them are just the person that he is off the field. Every time you see a video with this kid, every time you hear him talk, you become a bigger fan. There's no doubt about that. But more on the football side of things, the route running is just ridiculous. It is incredible how he gets in and out of breaks. It's incredible how he breaks down at the top of routes. The guy's releases are about as good as you're going to find in the entire group, and he's someone that is going to do incredible, incredible things at the next level. Now, I do want him to go to a very specific team. I'll be totally honest. I'm a little bit biased on this one. I badly want him to go to the Broncos. If you know the story between him and Bo Nix, that was essentially his brother when they were growing up, and a guy that they have had an incredible relationship. When Bo Nix was at Auburn, he was at Troy. Then they both move up to Oregon and have an incredible career together. Would love to see them find their way to be on the same team one more time, and I would love to see them both in Denver. That being said, wherever he finds himself, he is going to be a star to me. He is a guy that I think the bag is remarkably deep when it comes to a route tree perspective, and he's going to make big plays. That is just the nature of what this kid brings. When you have that breakaway speed, when you have the shiftiness that he has, he's going to make big plays for you one way or another. You just got to give him the keys, give him the openings, and then let him run. So he's going to be a guy that, regardless of where you put him on the field, regardless of what route you want him to run or how you want him to run it, he's going to be able to do it, and do it at a very, very high level. I still think there's certain things that he needs to get a little bit better on, including the physicality at different parts of the route, but overall, very, very talented kid, and a guy that, if you use that type of speed the right way, you're going to have a lot of very, very nice results. Chris Paul Jr. is the other guy I want to talk about, and he screams 10-year vet to me at linebacker. He is a remarkably good player. He plays the run about as good as anyone you're going to find in this class, and is very smart in coverage. Not necessarily elite by any means, but absolutely is a guy that can play the hook coverage and play a running back coming out of the backfield, can play a tight end every now and then when you very much need him to. The biggest thing to me is his closing speed is incredible. If you use him as a possible spy in different situations where, say, you're playing a Lamar Jackson, or you're playing a running quarterback that can make you hurt, a Jaden Daniels. This is a guy that can really be a spy and then close down space very, very quickly. Now, there is a couple of questions there. There is a couple of questions with his size, with his ability to play middle linebacker at the next level. I think he's going to be more than fine. Had 3.5 sacks, 86 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 INT for Ole Miss this past year. I think he's someone that, if you have a young team right now, let's say it's the Panthers or someone like that, you have a young team that needs kind of that center that they can build around on the defensive side of the ball, I think this could be the guy. I think he could be an anchor for a team for a very long time. I think he can make a GM very, very happy. And frankly, I think he's going to tear apart interviews as well as just about anyone. He has a remarkably good head on his shoulders, and I think they're going to tell right away that this kid will run through a brick wall to get to the football field every day if he had to. He's a remarkably good player, and whenever he plays on the football field, it's just a guy you want to coach. So cannot wait to see what he can do at the next level, and think he's just going to be a very long-time player at the linebacker position. And then we'll talk about Jack Besh, a player that went through some tragedy here recently. We talked about it on the show, the tragedy of losing his brother in the New Orleans attack around the Sugar Bowl. He's battled through that. He has obviously had to deal with that, as has his whole family, and he's at the Senior Bowl right now, and he is catching a lot of eyes. He has been a remarkable player, one of the guys that probably has been one of the bigger standouts of the entire thing. I think there's a number of guys that have stood out in a number of different ways. Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall that we talked about yesterday, being one of them. This might be number 2 or number 3. Really remarkable player and done an incredible job this year. I think the best thing about him is he's remarkably good at tracking the ball while it's in the air. The body control is great, and he can do some acrobatic catches that a lot of guys can't do. Really, really remarkable hands, and he's someone that I really do think has the ability to really, whatever NFL team he's on, be a very useful player for a very long time. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a wide receiver 1 or tear the league to pieces by any means, but I think he's too smart of a player. I think he's too capable of a player that has too deep of a bag to not be in the NFL for a very long time. Very complete receiver, and a guy that continued to kind of bounce around throughout his college career, but finally found a landing place at TCU and did an incredible job over the last couple of years, and obviously has battled through some things off the field that are unlike anything that we can possibly fathom. So going to be a really interesting player to watch. Obviously, I am rooting for him, as are a lot of people around that realm, but remarkable player nonetheless, and definitely a guy that I cannot wait to see at the next level. I think he's going to be a 10-year vet for someone as a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3, maybe an Adam Thielen type guy. Definitely will be interesting to watch that unfold, but let's take our third break here. And when we come back, let's do our way too early 2025 superlatives. I'll give out what I think is the best quarterback, best offensive and defensive player, the sleeper of the year, some different stuff right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my players I'm watching for the NFL draft. Definitely my favorite prospects out there. A lot of different guys that I didn't have a chance to get to, but overall some great guys out there and definitely some guys to watch this upcoming weekend in the Senior Bowl. But let's get into my way too early 2025 superlatives. I've been thinking about this over the last couple of days, kind of who I think is the best at different positions, who I think is the best offensive, defensive player, all that different type of stuff. Want to jump into really quickly as we get into the 2025 talk. There's a million different things to unpack over the next little bit, and we will get to it all, but I do think there is certain things that kind of just want to talk about in grandiose perspective. I want to talk about who I think the best quarterback is going into the 2025 season. Maybe a sleeper of the year, maybe a head coach that needs to take a big leap, and all that different type of stuff. And we'll go ahead and jump in, and we'll do the quarterback first. I do think Cade Klubnik is the best quarterback in the country going into 2025. I think he's the most dangerous, the most complete guy, and I think he's a guy that has all the veteran need that you could possibly want. And I think he's someone that, especially going into his third year in the offense with Garrett Riley, has the ability to do some really special things. His running ability is one of the more underrated parts of really any quarterback's game in the country. He's a very, very capable runner, a guy that can absolutely utilize that to his advantage. And when you're back there trying to deal with all the different stuff that Garrett Riley can throw at you, in the pass game, he's more than happy to tuck the ball away, go for 20 yards, get that first down, and continue on down the field. So I think he's a guy where you look around the country, you have Garrett Nussmeier, you have a ton of other guys that are remarkably talented. I think the combination of the mobility that he does have that some other guys don't, the veteran leadership that he has that some other don't, and the ability for him to make a number of plays with his arm that some others definitely do struggle with around the country, I think that gives him a little bit of an advantage. The improvement has been relatively steady since he's been able to get Garrett Riley by his side, and I think it's going to be a little bit better next year. He does have to work on the consistency and make sure that he's making all the right reads, making all the right throws at the right times, but I do think he's a guy that can absolutely take that big next step, and he's absolutely someone that I look forward into 2025 and say there's very few guys that I would take right over Cade Klubnik right about now. Then you got Jeremiah Smith, the best offensive player in the country as far as I'm concerned, a true freak of nature, and a guy that we'd be talking about as the number 1 overall pick right now in the NFL draft if he didn't have to come back to college, but he does. We get him for at least 2 more years, which sounds insane to say, but that's the reality of the situation. He's the biggest security blanket that I've ever seen. I'll be totally honest. Now, I thought Marvin Harrison was ridiculous in the ultimate just throw it down there and he'll be there type of guy. Jeremiah Smith is different in every sense of the word, and that's not to take anything away from what Marvin Harrison was, but there are certain things that this kid can do that I've just never seen, and it's really one of those things where we make the joke all the time of number 4's down there, just throw it. It is literally that. There's no other way to put it. He is someone that you don't need to know the route. You don't need to know how he's running it. You don't need to know who he's matched up against. You just throw it up and you let him go make a play because, to me, he is far and away the best offensive player in the country right now. He's a true freak of nature. I think he's the best player in the country, and he probably would be the best player in the country going into 2026 as well. A true freak of nature and someone that I think if you're looking at the NFL draft right about now, the Titans were talking about generational talents that they would draft. This would be the guy that they were talking about. If he was in this draft, this would absolutely be the guy that would go number 1 overall. He's got to come back for another 2 years, so we get to enjoy him a little bit longer, but definitely the best offensive player in the country going into next year, and have to assume it's not going to change going into 2026 either. The same team, on the defensive side of the ball, the best defensive player is Caleb Downs from Ohio State. There are a lot of other guys that I could think of here. 2 other guys in particular I thought of, Denai Dennis Sutton and Colin Simmons, 2 guys that I think are right up there in terms of defensive players, but this is the guy setting the pace as far as I'm concerned. He has all the tools you could possibly want. Another guy that we'd be talking about in the top 10 right now if he was draft eligible, but he's got 1 more year to him, so he's definitely going to be a top 10 pick when he comes out next year, and a guy that just is an absolute torpedo in the run game, can do everything you possibly want him to do in the pass game. Maybe does need to get a little bit better in that realm, but is plenty good right about now, and it just looks like there's about 4 of them on the field. I don't fully understand how he makes some of the plays that he did. The play he made against Texas is one of the better ones that I saw the entirety of the year. He's going to be a beast. There's really no other way about that. He's going to be a beast next year in college. He's going to be a beast in the NFL, and he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I've never seen a safety with that's that complete, that has that ability, and that is willing to hit people as hard as he is willing to hit people. He's remarkable and definitely a guy that I think we look back in a couple of years, we're saying, is he one of the better defensive players to ever come through Ohio State? The sleeper team of the year in 2025 to me is Kansas State. I think this is a team that you look forward and you say, this year did not go the way that you wanted it to. You kind of push Will Johnson out the door, you usher him out the building, and you move on to the Avery Johnson era, and you fall a little bit short. You were in the conversation down to the end of the season, but you lose that game to Iowa State, fall out of the Big 12 championship, and you're left wondering, did we make the right decision? Now, I tend to believe they did. Now, I fully understand that Will Howard just had a remarkable year and did incredible things. He wouldn't have had that type of year in the Kansas State offense. It's a very different offense. It doesn't have the playmakers that Ohio State has, and it's in a position where he wouldn't have been as good. That's just the reality of that situation. I think they both moved on for the right reasons. But that being said, they were breaking in a new play caller this year, a new quarterback this year, and I think he did have a lot of talent around him. Didn't have the talent that he's going to have this year. I can almost promise you that. So I think Avery Johnson is someone that could really take a big-time leap next year. The passing does need to take a big-time step forward, but it slowly did throughout the year, and I think it definitely could throughout this offseason. And then you look at the team around him, and you have Dylan Edwards, a guy that's fully ready to break out in his junior year. Definitely a guy that I think could be really special in the pass-catching game. And then Lincoln Kerr, a guy they got a tight end that is absolutely elite in every sense of the word, a 5-star. I think they're going to be plenty fine. The defense has tons of veteran talent coming back. I think they can make a nice run in 2025. I don't know how deep that goes. I don't know if it's just to the CFP. I don't know if it's past the first round, whatever that looks like. But definitely a team that I look at right now. I think a lot of people are starting to sell their stock on them. I'm going to buy a little bit of it. I think the Wildcats will be plenty good in 2025 and might just be that team that wins the Big 12 and gets to the CFP. The head coach that just needs a bounce back is Mike Norvell. I don't think there's any other coach that you could really put here because it was bad. It was bad from start to finish. You lose the game to Georgia Tech and everyone's thinking, okay, maybe it was just the travel, maybe it was a lot of different things that kind of held you down. Then you go back home, you lose to Boston College, and everyone says, okay, it's getting a little bit nervous. I don't know what's going on here. And then it just bottoms out. It continues to bottom out. It gets worse and worse and worse throughout the season. You end 2-10, and I don't know where you go from here. They've done a relatively good job bringing in some portal guys, got Gus Malzahn to come over as the offensive coordinator, got a new defensive coordinator. they've done some nice stuff. There's no doubt about that. And I think they will be a better team next year. I don't know what the bounce back has to look like. I think that's the big question here is, what do Florida State fans need to see to feel confident in Mike Norvell going forward? Is it 9 wins? Do you need to bounce all the way back to there? Is it 8 wins? Could 7 wins do the trick and say, okay, at least we bounce back from a really bad year. Now we can really attack it in 2026. I think it's a big question. I don't think Mike Norvell even knows the answer to that. Obviously, he wants to get back to 9, 10 wins and be back in the CFP conversation, but let's just say they miss the mark again. Let's just say they go 6-6 or 7 or 5-7 and they say, okay, we're moving on, we're finding a new head coach. Florida and Miami are just going to continue to get past them, are going to continue to recruit at a higher level, are going to continue to win at a higher level and probably beat them in their path to do that. So you're in a position right now, if you're Florida State, where you don't bounce back in 2025, it might take you a little bit of time to bounce back as well, bounce back after that. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Mike Norvell is coaching for his job in 2026, and I don't know what the moniker is, but I know for a fact he's got to get at least to 8, 7. It's very hard to get an idea, but he's got to definitely improve quite a bit, or he's going to be finding a new job right about now. James Franklin, the guy that needs to deliver the most. There's no doubt about that. The head coach that is looking at it and saying, this is the year, one way or another. Now, it's not to say he won't have a shot at the title ever again, but I don't know if y'all can remember it. I can't remember a time where he had a better roster, a better staff, a better buy-in from the NIL perspective than he has right now. So you're in a position where you're going into 2025. The big question is, can you win those big games? You're as well equipped to win those big games as you ever have been. There's no doubt about that. And you're in a position where you can make all types of moves, make all types of plays, and win a couple of those big-time games that you very badly need to win. Obviously, some things need to be figured out, including the wide receiver. Drew Aller needs to take that next step. A lot of different things need to be kind of ironed out before they get there. But the reality is, he's got to deliver in 2025. Does that mean having to win a national title? That's a question for Penn State fans, and maybe one can tell me what they think in the comments, but the reality is he's got to deliver. One way or another, he has to get over that hump, he has to win that big game, or maybe he's looking for a job in a year. It sounds crazy and don't necessarily expect it to happen, but you lose to Ohio State, you lose to Oregon, you lose in the CFP again. How confident can you feel that James Franklin is ever going to be the guy that gets it done? And then we'll do impact freshmen on the offensive side of the ball. DeCorian Moore is a freak in every sense of the word. He is a true difference maker and a guy that I think can walk onto the field and be one of the best, maybe the best wide receiver in that team and for Oregon this upcoming year. He's been absolutely remarkable. Kind of reminds me of Xavier Worthy when he came into Texas. Now, maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, and a little bit better at those 50-50 balls, but absolutely someone that he's going to walk onto the scene and be a huge part of this offense. Now, Oregon has tons of wide receivers. There's no problem with wide receivers over there in Eugene, but the reality is, as far as I'm seeing it, it's Evan Stewart and then it's DeCorian Moore. This guy's an absolute freak and someone that can really set the world on fire. So he's a tough guy to miss. In every single cycle, he was a guy that you saw every single week because you saw a different insane highlight. You saw him almost injure himself with Travis Hunter there, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid, a kid that I think could very well be Oregon's wide receiver 1 next year. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. I do think Evan Stewart will be that guy, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if this kid walked onto campus, totally took over, and become one of the big names, kind of like a Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams were this year. And then Justice Terry on the defensive side of the ball is the impact freshman for me. I think he's a guy that just fits the need for Texas right about now. They have a defensive tackles that are walking out the door. They've gotten a little bit of help with Cole Brevard and a couple other guys walking into the team, but I think he's a kid that's just going to be impossible to keep off the field. An absolute freak of nature, a guy that absolutely has the measurables that you need right about now. You give him even a couple of months in the nutrition and working out standpoint from college, he's going to be a freak in every sense of the word. Now, there could be a little bit of time to get him kind of acclimated, get him up to speed, and they have some other guys there. Alex January is going to be a huge player, and a number of other guys, but he's too athletic, he's too physical, he's too much of a difference maker to keep him off the field. I think he's going to be a guy that slowly tapers into the lineup and then maybe becomes one of the better guys in that entire lineup by the end of the year. But there are definitely some other guys that can do some big-time things. You know, Devin Sanchez over at Ohio State, I absolutely love. Dorian Brew at Oregon is going to be incredible. A number of other guys that are going to be incredible players to watch, and Elijah Griffin over at Georgia is going to be an awesome player at defensive tackle. So there are plenty of impact players, no doubt about that. But when I look at the need that Texas has at defensive tackle, and I look at the player that Justice Terry is, it's hard to deny that guy's going to have a big time impact. So you look at 2025, and all of this stuff is very subject to change. There's a number of different freshmen that I'm sure will let themselves be known throughout spring that I'll feel a little bit more confident in, or a quarterback that maybe looks a little bit better than what Cade Klubnik does early on in spring, and maybe these can flip around just a little bit, but that's where my mind is at right now. There's a number of different players that I could have put in there, but feel pretty good about what I had right there. And then we got to move on to the very last segment. We'll take our last break here. When we come back, we'll do our top 10 head coaches as we head into 2025. Very tough list to put together, especially at the bottom of this list, but feel pretty good about what I have. I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the different superlatives for the 2025 season, kind of some early superlatives, so definitely some things that are subject to change, but some really great players coming in, some impact freshmen that I think are going to be incredible, led by Decoria Moore and Justice Terry as far as I'm concerned. But let's get into the top 10 head coaches as we head into 2025. Very tough list to put together, especially after the year that we had, that a lot of different head coaches kind of popped up into the mix, and very, very tough to keep them off this one, but feel pretty good about the 10 that I have. And we'll start with a couple of honorable mentions before we jump into the list here. Kenny Dillingham and Curt Cignetti, the two guys on the end there. Those are just two guys I want to see a little bit more from. They've done incredible jobs this year, and definitely just want to see what 2025 looks like and then what 2026 looks like, because a lot of guys can do it one time. Doing it a couple of times definitely makes you a little bit higher echelon in head coach. And then for Mario Cristobal and Lane Kiffin, I just got to see a CFP appearance. I think they're really good head coaches, and Mario Cristobal a little bit lower on this list than maybe some other guys, but I do think he's someone that could shoot up this list very quickly, because he's built a very good foundation down there in Coral Gables. You just got to get through that last hurdle, and it's been a really hard time to do that, but you do that, and then you probably shoot up on this list very quickly. But let's go ahead and jump in. And number 10, Josh Heupel. As far as I'm concerned, this is the number 10 head coach, and someone that I think a lot of people underestimate for a number of different reasons, probably because he's around Kirby Smart, has lost to him a couple of different times, obviously was around Nick Saban, was around Bama, and you get overshadowed. That's just kind of what happens when you're Tennessee, but the reality is he's done an incredibly good job. He took over this team that was on a little bit of disarray, wasn't quite in the place that it needed to be, and did a great job building out this team, figured out that he needed a much better defense after the 2022 season, upgraded there essentially immediately. Done an incredible job, got in Tim Banks, and they've done an incredible job getting to be one of the best defenses in the entire country. Last year, you felt like it was going to be Nico Imaliava throwing the ball all around the yard, and then Dylan Sampson became the best player on that team. Josh Heupel just adapted, made sure that he put his team in the best position to win, and it's been incredible to watch what he's been able to do. The line of improvement has been very steady and very solid. Obviously, you want to break through. Obviously, you want to get that CFP win that eluded them this year, but a very talented head coach and absolutely someone that continues to rise in my mind. Brian Kelly here at 9. He has dropped quite a bit in the past couple of years as far as I'm concerned. Now, it's not to say that he couldn't fly right back up in this list in 2025, but he is someone that you look back at the 2023 team. How do you not at least get to the CFP? How do you have Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, and Malik Neighbors and find a way to miss out? And I understand the defense was terrible. I understand Brian Kelly can only do so much for that defense. But the reality is you shouldn't have missed out. There's no way that you should miss out with that amount of talent, with that much ability on the offensive side of the ball. So that is something that I'm a little bit worried about. Now, he's done a great job building out the staff. It's been a really remarkable staff, one of the best in the entire country. The roster is very talented, a little bit more veteran than it has been in the past. If he misses the mark in 2025, I think his fall from grace will be very, very fast. I think there will be a lot of people in Baton Rouge that will very much want him fired, and I don't know what will happen there. It'll be very interesting to watch, but a very talented head coach, a guy that has a lot of success behind him. The question is there much success in front of him? James Franklin here at 8. He's a very, very good head coach, but at a certain point, you got to win that game. You got to be the guy that finds a way to win the big game that a lot of these other coaches, all the other coaches that we're about to talk about, have done. So he's one of those guys that I have all the respect in the world for, and I think he can win a national title. I think 2025 might just be the year that he does that, but the reality is, if it doesn't come together, if it all falls apart once again, you go 10-2 and you maybe make the CFP but lose in the second round to an Ohio State, how much are you going to be able to say? After the 2025 season, are you going to be left there saying, maybe we just move on and we find a new head coach and we try to build this thing up with someone new, because this is obviously not working, because 2025 is about as good of a chance as he's going to have. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think he's a very capable head coach, and frankly, I think he's going to get very close and probably get over that hump just a little bit in 2025, but there's definitely some worry here and some things that a little bit ago I wasn't super worried about, that now it's just how long is it going to take type of energy. Dabo Swinney here at 7. This is a guy that's an elite head coach in college football. I fully understand that there has been some tapering off when the NIL and the portal era was kind of introduced, but in that time even, he's won multiple national titles and gotten to the CFP. So the reality is he's still doing a very, very good job over there. He is set up for a ton of success in 2025. If they can't make the ACC title and get back to the CFP, I think the questions get a little bit louder around him. You know, they started the year being very loud. After that Georgia loss, really tapered off after that incredible run they had to finish the season, but it's still around. You know, you still lost to South Carolina, you still lost to Texas, you still lost to Georgia, and you still lost to Louisville, and you come back in the next year, you lose that first big game, then people are going to have questions. There's no doubt about that, and you lose to LSU to open the year. It's definitely going to be a very precarious time over there in Clemson. Now, I think they're going to be more than fine. I think they're going to be probably the best team in the ACC next year, but definitely a coach that is kind of teetering on that edge and could go either way in the next couple of years. Kalen DeBoer here at 6. I fully understand that this was not the year that a lot of people wanted and a lot of people expected from Kalen DeBoer, but he was coaching in the national title about 400 days ago. So he's not far removed from being at the very top of the mountaintop, and a guy that is a very talented head coach and I think will be very successful at Alabama. Now, I do have him a little bit lower than I would have coming into the year and probably than I would have guessed coming out of the year, because there are some issues. There are definitely some things that I'm a little bit worried about when it comes to just how he can handle this job. All of the outside noise, all of the craziness, all of the stuff that comes with Bama that doesn't come with Washington, he's still going to have to adapt to that. Now, 2025 is going to be a huge year, and they seem to be set up for at least a little bit more success than they were this year, but it's going to be one of those things that he doesn't deliver in 2025. It might be coaching for your job in 2026, if I'm being totally honest. Very good head coach, but definitely a guy that is in a position where you can't just be very good, you got to be downright elite. Marcus Freeman here at 5, a fantastic head coach, and a guy that I probably would have had much lower if he lost to Penn State in the semifinal. I would have had lower if he lost to Georgia for sure, but he found a way to win those 2 games, and it was a large part because of his head coaching ability and because his ability to keep his team all the way engaged. You know, it's very, very hard to make sure that your team stays engaged, especially when you have a team that's a very ground and pound, know that they're not going to necessarily be the biggest comeback team in the world. You had to come back in a couple of those different games down the stretch, and he was able to get his team there. Now, the questionable part that will add a little bit of a cloud over this is just kind of what happens or how long will it take to win a national title. You know, they got very, very close this year. There were also a lot of things working for them this year. So how many of those things will be working for them next year? How quickly will it be to get back to a quarterback that can lead you like Riley Leonard did? And how quickly can you get an Xavier Watts and a Riley Leonard back, or Riley Mills back on this team, because they're not easy to come by. Now, I think he's going to be more than fine. I do think he's going to win a national title at Notre Dame, but it's definitely one of those things that there's a reality in every head coaching world that maybe you just passed up your best opportunity. I don't think he did, but that's always a reality you have to think about. Dan Lanning here at 4. The Oregon program under Dan Lanning has gotten better and better every single year. The one blemish this year was the loss to Ohio State, and that's terrible. The only blemish in 2023 were the 2 losses to Washington, and then a year before that, it was a little bit worse. So he's done an incredible job. I think he will win a national title at Oregon. I think he's done too good of a job recruiting. I think he's built out one of the best staffs and rosters in the entire country, won the Big Ten in his very first year, and I think he's only getting started up there in Eugene. We know the NIL buyout buy-in is absolutely insane. We know they have all the ability in the world to scale into a national title winner, and I think they're going to do it at some point here pretty soon. I do think Dan Lanning breaks through. Maybe he's the next head coach to win a national title at his school because he's done an incredible job, and as long as Dante Moore is the guy that they expect him to be, they should be firmly back in that position in 2025. Steve Sarkisian, number 3 here, the guy that has been knocking on the doorstep for 2 years in a row now, 2 plays away from 2 national title appearances and maybe a national title between one of those. You know, you never know what would have happened against Michigan or Notre Dame if Texas were the team to face off, but it's definitely a guy that is very, very close. But in the past 2 years, just in the past 2 years, he has won a Big 12 title, gotten to the SEC title in his very first year, 2 CFP appearances, a win at Bama, at Michigan, 25-5 overall record, beat Oklahoma this past year. He's done an incredible job. He's obviously been the head coach that Texas fans hoped he would be. Texas is, you can say, back if you want to. I don't necessarily go that far, but the reality is they are a team that is at least back in the conversation, at least back at the top of the sport, and definitely a team that you're going into 2025 saying maybe they're the outright favorite to win the national title. I don't think they are on the betting market right now, but you look at what Steve Sarkisian has built, it's been about as impressive as anyone around the country in the last couple of years, because when he took over that job, they had 7 scholarship offensive linemen. Now they're one of the most physical offensive lines in the entire country. Ryan Day here at number 2 is the new name in the number 2 spot, although I probably would have had him here already if I'm being honest, but the reality is he did break through this year and made a lot of people delete some tweets they had about him, but he's done an incredible job with on and off the field stuff. Obviously has had to deal with a lot of stuff off the field that a lot of us can't even fathom, but he's been incredible, and he's been a guy that the big worry about him was, is he ever going to give up play calling duties? Is he ever going to be able to put that part of himself aside and say, I'll just be a delegator? He was able to do that this year, so he's a great game planner. He's a great motivator. He's a great delegator. He's a guy that is born to be a head coach. He's done an incredible job, and although it took him a little bit of time, and a lot of people had plenty to say about it taking time, and he does still have to beat that Michigan team, the reality is he's done an incredible job, and I would not be surprised if that was not the I would bet that is not the last or even the second to last time that we see him lift a CFP trophy. I think he's too good, and he's only 45. He's got plenty of time to still figure some things out, and I think he's going to be a head coach and be at the top of the sport for a very long time. Kirby Smart's still the top guy as far as I'm concerned. I think the back-to-back titles, 1 game away in 2023 from getting into the CFP, and then who knows what would have happened. That was a very good Georgia team, and then you look back at this year and you say, I'm not saying that they would have won it. I actually have said they wouldn't have won it with Carson Beck at quarterback, but definitely did throw a wrench into what they were able to do, and even in a down year, they won the SEC. Somehow they were able to win the SEC while losing to Alabama, while losing their starting quarterback halfway through that game, and a lot of different things going wrong for the Georgia Bulldogs. They were able to find their way to an SEC title. You only do that with an elite head coach. There's no doubt about that. And frankly, he's someone that's just going to refuse to stay down. You are not going to be able to keep Kirby Smart on the mat for very long. He's going to come back with a vengeance next year. Already added the number of wide receivers that are downright terrifying. Georgia's going to win another national title with Kirby Smart. I can almost promise you that. He is too good of a head coach. They have too good of a program, and definitely too good of athletes to not miss out a number of years in a row. He is going to win another national title. I don't think he's going to get close to Saban, but he is someone that I think is setting the pace for the head coaches right now, and I can't imagine that changing anytime soon. So remarkable head coaches all across this sport. So many guys that deserve to be at least in that conversation, but the 10 that I have, I feel pretty confident in. It could flip around a lot. If Kurt Cignetti, if Kenny Dillingham, if Mario Cristobal go on a remarkable run next year, you could see that flip around quite a bit. But as of right now, I think Kirby Smart's setting the pace. I think Ryan Day's really close behind him, and then you have a little bit of a hodgepodge of guys that are just waiting to break through, waiting to be that next guy. But definitely an incredible thing, and we'll see how that develops into the 2025 season. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want, so anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.